He was just a struggling dad walking miles in the pouring rain to get to a job interview, his best suit soaked and his heart heavy with the weight of providing for his son. But he had no idea. The woman who pulled over to give him a ride wasn't just another kind stranger. She was the daughter of the city's most reclusive billionaire, and that one act of kindness was about to change both of their lives forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The rain wasn't just falling. It was a physical presence, a cold, heavy sheet that blurred the edges of the world and turned the city into a watercolor painting left out in a storm. Liam Miller felt it soaking through the thin wool of his suit jacket, the one he'd bought on clearance 5 years ago, for a life that no longer existed. It clung to his shoulders, a second skin of icy dread that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the 3 miles still stretching between him and the downtown high-rise where his future, or lack thereof, waited. Each step was a quiet calculation. The worn leather of his dress shoes, polished to a dull shine that morning, was already dark with water, the soles making a soft, squelching sound against the pavement. He tried to walk faster, but the wind pushed back, a bully shoving him toward the life he was desperately trying to escape. His car, a tired sedan that had coughed its last breath 2 days ago in a cloud of smoke and defeat, sat abandoned in his apartment's parking lot. The cost of a tow truck, let alone a repair, was a figure so far beyond his reality it felt like a joke. His savings account, once a respectable cushion, had been whittled down to double digits after months of unemployment, a casualty of a corporate downsizing that had stolen his career as an architectural draftsman and left him with a portfolio of blueprints for buildings he could no longer afford to even enter. He clutched the worn leather portfolio under his arm, shielding it with his body. Inside were his designs, his last remaining proof that he was more than just a man with patched elbows and a hole in his savings. He was a builder, a creator. He just needed one person to see that again. The interview was for a junior position at a firm he once would have considered a step down. Now, it was a lifeline. He thought of his son Leo, back at their small apartment with Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman next door, who watched him for a handful of crumpled bills Liam could barely afford. He pictured Leo's face, all wide, trusting eyes, and a smile that could still, on the best of days, make Liam believe in things like hope. Leo was 7. He didn't understand budgets or overdue notices. He just understood that his dad was his hero, the man who could build magnificent cities out of plastic blocks and fix any broken toy with a steady hand and a patient sigh. Liam couldn't let that hero drown in the rain on some forgotten sidewalk. He straightened his back, wiped the water from his face with a numb hand, and kept walking, his jaw tight with a promise he'd made to a sleeping 7-year-old that morning. "Don't worry, buddy. Daddy's going to fix everything." It was a lie, or at least a prayer disguised as one, and the weight of it was heavier than the rain itself. A car slowed beside him, its tires hissing through the water. He didn't look, assuming it was just another driver navigating the urban river the street had become. But then, a window rolled down, and a voice, calm and clear, cut through the noise. "You look like you're heading somewhere important." He finally turned, and through the curtain of rain, he saw her. Clara Kensington sat in the driver's seat of the gray, unassuming sedan, her hands resting lightly on the wheel. The car was a deliberate choice, a rental she'd picked specifically for its anonymity. It had no logo that screamed wealth, no polished chrome that invited attention. It was the color of the sky, a perfect camouflage for a woman trying to disappear in plain sight. From her vantage point, the city was a wash of muted tones and hurried motion, a world she was a part of but had never truly felt connected to. She had been driving aimlessly for an hour, the quiet hum of the engine, a welcome substitute for the noise in her own head. Her phone, tucked away in the glove compartment, was a silent grenade of unanswered calls from her father's chief of staff, emails from board members marked urgent, and a calendar filled with obligations she had no intention of meeting. She was supposed to be in a boardroom on the 47th floor, sipping filtered water and nodding along to a presentation about market expansion. Instead, she was here, watching the rain and feeling the familiar, hollow ache of being utterly and completely alone in a world that knew her name but not her soul. That's when she saw him. He was just a man walking, but there was something in his posture that made her slow the car. It wasn't defeat. It was defiance. He walked with his shoulders squared against the wind, his head up, one arm wrapped protectively around a leather case as if it held the last of his dignity. His suit, though clearly soaked, was clean and pressed. He wasn't just caught in the rain, he was on a mission, and the storm was just another obstacle. She knew that look. She'd worn it herself, a different version of it, in boardrooms filled with men who saw her as a name, an asset, a legacy to be managed. The silent, steely resolve of someone trying to hold on when everything is conspiring to pull you under. He didn't look over, didn't ask for help, didn't even seem to notice her. He just kept moving, one determined step after another. Something in her chest shifted. It was an impulse, the kind her father had always warned her against, uncalculated, emotional, inefficient. He called it a weakness. For the first time in a long time, she wondered if it was a strength. Before she could talk herself out of it, she pulled alongside him and rolled down the window. "You look like you're heading somewhere important," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He stopped, startled, and turned. For a moment, his guard was down, and she saw the raw fatigue in his eyes, the deep lines of worry etched around his mouth. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world, and for some inexplicable reason, she wanted to help him lift it, if only for a few blocks. He was just a man in the rain, a stranger. But in his tired, resolute face, she saw a flicker of something real, something she'd been searching for in a world made of glass and steel. And in that moment, making a decision that had no agenda and no return on investment felt like the most liberating thing she'd done all year. Liam stared at the woman in the car, his mind struggling to process the offer. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead, and a cold trickle ran down his back, but for a moment he didn't feel it. He just saw her face, framed by the car window, calm eyes, a gentle expression, and an absence of the pity he'd grown so accustomed to. People in this city didn't just stop for strangers. They honked, they swerved, they looked straight through you. "I'm fine," he said, the words automatic, a reflex of pride that had been his only armor for months. He started to turn away, intent on continuing his waterlogged pilgrimage. "You're also completely soaked," she replied, a hint of amusement in her voice that wasn't mocking, but kind. "And unless you're trying to make a dramatic entrance, you might want to be dry for that important meeting. Come on, I don't bite." He hesitated, the war between his pride and his practicality raging within him. His pride told him to keep walking, to not accept help, to prove he could make it on his own. But his practicality, the part of him that knew his son was waiting, that this interview was his last real shot, screamed at him to get in the car. The thought of arriving at the gleaming, sterile lobby of Sterling, Wright Designs, looking like a drowned rat, was enough to tip the scales. He took a deep breath, the cold air burning his lungs, and gave a short, reluctant nod. "Okay," he said, his voice rough. "Thank you." He walked around to the passenger side, the door clicking open with a soft, modern sound that was a world away from his own car's protesting groan. The inside was clean, minimalist, and smelled faintly of new leather, and something else he couldn't place, something clean and subtle, like expensive soap. He sank into the seat, the warmth of the car's heater a blessed relief against his chilled skin. He placed his portfolio carefully on his lap, his knuckles white as he gripped it. "I'm Liam," he said, turning to her. "Clara," she replied, her eyes briefly meeting his before she turned her attention back to the road, pulling smoothly away from the curb. "So, where to, Liam?" He gave her the address, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He felt exposed, vulnerable, sitting here in his damp, second-best suit next to a woman whose car was probably worth more than everything he owned. He was a project, a stray she'd picked up out of kindness, and the thought chafed at his already frayed sense of self-worth. To fill the silence, a silence that felt heavy with his own inadequacy, he asked, "What makes you think I'm going to a meeting?" She glanced at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "The suit, the portfolio, and the look on your face that says you're about to walk into a lion's den? I've seen it before." He didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded, staring out at the rain-streaked cityscape. The drive was quiet for a few blocks, the only sounds the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers and the soft hum of the engine. He should have been grateful, and he was, but gratitude was tangled with shame. He was a 35-year-old man who couldn't even afford a cab, accepting a ride from a stranger. It was the antithesis of the capable, stable father he so desperately wanted to be for Leo. Clara sensed his discomfort. It was a palpable thing, a quiet tension that filled the space between them. She recognized it as the rigid posture of a man who wasn't used to accepting help, who saw kindness as a debt he couldn't repay. She'd seen it in her father's early business partners, men who came from nothing and were terrified of being seen as anything less than self-made. To ease the quiet, she kept her tone light. "So, architectural design?" she asked, nodding toward the portfolio on his lap. He looked surprised that she'd guessed. "Yeah," he said, his grip on the leather case loosening slightly. "Draftsman mostly. I design things." It was a simple statement, but she heard the pride behind it, the echo of a passion that hadn't been extinguished by whatever hardship he was facing. "I've always been fascinated by architecture," she said, and it was the truth. The idea of creating a space that can make people feel something safe, or inspired, or calm. It seems like a kind of magic. His expression softened. For the first time, a genuine light flickered in his eyes. "That's exactly what it is," he said, his voice warming. "It's not just about beams and support structures. It's about how light falls in a room at 3 p.m. It's about the flow from one space to the next. It's about building a place where a family can make memories." He was talking about more than buildings now. She could hear it. He was talking about a home, about stability, about the very things he was clearly fighting to hold on to. "My son, Leo," he continued, a soft smile touching his lips. "He's the real architect. You should see the towers he builds. He has this instinct for balance. Knows exactly where to put the anchor block so the whole thing doesn't come crashing down." As he spoke about his son, the tension in his shoulders eased. He wasn't Liam, the struggling job applicant, anymore. He was Leo's dad, a man defined not by his circumstances but by his love. Clara listened, captivated not by the story itself, but by the raw, unguarded affection in his voice. This was real. This quiet, fierce love was the kind of foundation she'd only ever read about. Her own childhood had been a blueprint of expectations and transactions, a series of calculated moves designed to groom her for a future she never chose. Love, in her world, was a liability, an emotion that clouded judgment. But listening to Liam, she felt a pang of something sharp and deep, not pity, but a profound and aching envy. He had something no amount of money could buy. They arrived at the towering glass building too soon. "This is it," he said, the tension returning to his voice. He reached for the door handle, then paused, turning to her. "Clara, thank you. I don't know what I would have done." "You would have kept walking," she said simply. "Go get him, Liam." He gave her a small, grateful nod and stepped out of the car, straightening his damp jacket as he disappeared into the building's revolving doors. It wasn't until she pulled away that Clara noticed it, lying on the passenger seat where he'd been sitting. A small, folded piece of paper had fallen from his portfolio. She picked it up. It was a child's drawing, rendered in bright, waxy crayon. A stick figure of a man with a crooked smile stood beside a towering, wobbly skyscraper, holding the hand of a smaller stick figure. At the bottom, in messy, earnest letters, was a single word: Daddy. She held the drawing in her hand, the simple paper feeling heavier than it should, and knew, with a certainty that startled her, that this wasn't the last time she would see Liam Miller. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs as he stepped into the elevator, the scent of rain and desperation clinging to him like a ghost. He tried to project confidence, to straighten his spine and adopt the posture of a man who belonged in a place like this, but he felt like an imposter. The interview was a blur of polite questions and carefully rehearsed answers. He walked them through his portfolio, his voice steady as he explained the intricacies of a sustainable library design, the clean lines of a residential project. He spoke of his passion for creating functional, beautiful spaces, but his mind kept drifting back to the cold reality of his empty bank account and his son waiting at home. He felt he'd done well, or at least, not terribly. They had been impressed with his work, their expressions unreadable but not dismissive. They told him they'd be in touch, the three most hopeful and terrifying words in the English language. He left the building feeling hollowed out, the adrenaline of the interview fading into a familiar, gnawing uncertainty. The rain had softened to a miserable drizzle, and the long walk home loomed before him. He pulled his jacket tighter and started the trek, his mind already racing with contingency plans calling that temp agency again, selling the last of his wife's jewelry, a thought that made his stomach clench with guilt. He was so lost in his thoughts that he didn't notice the gray sedan parked across the street from his apartment building until he was almost at the door. Clara was leaning against the hood, a small, hopeful smile on her face. He stopped, his tired brain struggling to catch up. "Clara, what are you doing here?" You dropped this," she said, holding out the folded crayon drawing. His breath caught. He took it from her, his fingers brushing hers for a fraction of a second. The touch was light, accidental, but it sent a jolt of warmth through him that had nothing to do with the weather. "Leo's," he murmured, unfolding it and looking at the wobbly drawing of himself. He must have tucked it in there for good luck. "I figured it was important," she said, her gaze soft. Just then, the apartment door swung open, and Leo came barreling out, his face lighting up when he saw his father. "Daddy!" he yelled, launching himself into Liam's arms. Liam hugged him tight, burying his face in his son's hair, inhaling the scent of peanut butter and childhood. "Hey, buddy. I missed you." Leo squirmed out of his arms and then spotted Clara. His eyes, big and curious, scanned her from head to toe. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice direct and devoid of any adult pretense. Liam's face flushed. "Leo, this is Clara. She was very kind and gave your dad a ride this morning." Clara knelt to Leo's level, her smile genuine. "It's very nice to meet you, Leo. Your dad told me all about your amazing buildings." Leo's chest puffed out with pride. "I'm making a new one. It has a secret tunnel. I'd love to see it sometime," she said, her eyes twinkling. Liam watched the exchange, a strange mix of gratitude and unease settling over him. He wasn't used to people being this kind, this present. He didn't know what she wanted, and in his world, everyone wanted something. But looking at her now, kneeling on the wet pavement to talk to his son about secret tunnels, he found himself wishing, for the first time in a long time, that she didn't want anything at all. The interaction was brief, lasting only a few more minutes before Clara insisted she had to go. Liam stood on the sidewalk, holding Leo's small hand, and watched her drive away. He felt a strange pang of disappointment as her car disappeared around the corner, a feeling he quickly pushed down. He couldn't afford to feel things like that. He had rent to pay and a son to feed. Hope was a luxury, and he was fresh out. "She's nice," Leo said, looking up at him. "Is she your friend?" "She's just a nice lady, buddy," Liam said, ruffling his hair as they headed inside. The apartment was small, the furniture a collection of mismatched pieces he'd acquired over the years, but it was clean and filled with Leo's artwork, which was taped to every available surface. It was a home built on love, if not on stable financial ground. Later that evening, after a dinner of scrambled eggs and toast, Liam was tucking Leo into bed when his son's voice, small and sleepy, piped up from under the covers. "Daddy, did you fix everything today?" The question landed with the weight of a physical blow. Liam sat on the edge of the bed, his back to Leo, and stared at a crack in the plaster on the wall. He wanted to lie, to say yes, to wrap his son in the comfort of a world where fathers were infallible superheroes. But he was so tired of lying to Leo and to himself. "I'm trying, kiddo," he said, his voice thick. "I'm trying really hard." Leo was quiet for a moment, then a small hand reached out and patted Liam's back. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're still the best builder in the world." Liam's throat tightened. He turned and hugged his son, holding on as if Leo were the only thing keeping him from falling apart. And in that moment, he was. The next day, an email arrived. It was from Sterling Wright. He'd gotten a second interview. A wave of relief so powerful it made him dizzy washed over him. It wasn't a job yet, but it was a chance. It was a flicker of light in a long, dark tunnel. He found himself thinking of Clara, of the ride, of her belief that he would go get him. It was a silly, superstitious thought. But he couldn't shake the feeling that she had been a harbinger of good luck, a temporary angel in a gray sedan. He didn't know her last name, didn't have her number, and would likely never see her again. She was a footnote in his story. But as he reread the email, a small, unfamiliar smile touched his lips. For the first time in months, the future didn't feel like a locked door. It felt like it was starting to creak open. Clara drove away from Liam's apartment building with the image of his face, that complex mix of pride, gratitude, and weariness seared into her mind. She hadn't intended to go back. Returning the drawing was just an excuse, a thin veil for a curiosity she couldn't quite name. She wanted to see him again, to confirm that the quiet strength she'd sensed in him wasn't just a projection of her own loneliness. Meeting his son Leo had only solidified the feeling. The boy was a bright, unfiltered spark of life, and the love between him and his father was a tangible thing, a warm, protective bubble in a cold world. She returned to the minimalist, high-end apartment she'd rented under a pseudonym, a place as clean and impersonal as a hotel suite. It was her escape, her pocket of anonymity in a city where her real name, Clara Kensington, was a brand. Kensington, as in Kensington Global, the real estate and development empire her father had built with ruthless precision. A name that opened every door but the ones that led to genuine connection. She kicked off her simple flats and padded across the cold hardwood floor to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city. The lights were beginning to glitter, a sea of diamonds spread across a velvet cloth. She used to find it beautiful. Now, it just looked lonely. Her real life was a carefully constructed fortress of board meetings, charity galas, and strategic alliances. She was good at it. She knew how to smile for the cameras, how to navigate a negotiation, how to be the poised, untouchable daughter of a titan. But the performance was draining her, chipping away at her soul until she felt like a ghost haunting her own life. Liam Miller, with his worn suit and fierce love for his son, was the most solid, real person she'd met in years. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, he was just trying to survive. That evening, a call came through on the burner phone she kept for emergencies. It was her father's assistant, a man named Arthur, whose voice was perpetually strained with a polite, managed anxiety. "Miss Kensington," he said, "your father is requesting your presence at the quarterly review tomorrow. It is imperative that you attend." "I'm not available, Arthur," she said, her voice flat. "With all due respect, ma'am, your father was very clear. He said to remind you that your sabbatical has gone on long enough, and that family obligations are not optional." "My father," Clara said, her grip tightening on the phone, "confuses obligations with ownership. Tell him I'll be in touch when I'm ready." She hung up before he could reply, the silence in the apartment rushing back in, louder than before. She leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the window, staring down at the city lights. She had run away from a life of gilded cages and suffocating expectations, only to find herself mesmerized by a man who was fighting for the very things she'd taken for granted: a home, a family, a sense of purpose. She wanted to help him, but she knew that her help, the kind that came with the Kensington name, was a double-edged sword. It could solve his problems, but it could also destroy the very thing she admired most about him: his unyielding, hard-won dignity. The second interview was in a smaller conference room, with fewer people and more intense questions. Liam felt more prepared this time, less like a man drowning and more like a swimmer finding his stroke. He walked them through his technical skills, answered questions about budget management and client relations with a confidence he hadn't felt in years. He left feeling a cautious optimism, a dangerous but welcome feeling. The email came the next day. He got the job. He read the words 3 times, his heart pounding a triumphant rhythm against his ribs. The salary wasn't what he used to make, but it was enough. It was enough for rent, for groceries, for a new transmission for the car. It was enough to breathe. He picked Leo up from Mrs. Gable's, swinging him into the air. "We're celebrating tonight, buddy. Pizza, whatever toppings you want." Leo's whoop of joy was the sweetest sound he'd ever heard. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the future wasn't a threat. It was a promise. That night, as they sat on the floor of their living room, a large pepperoni pizza between them, Liam felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. He had done it. He had pulled them back from the brink. As Leo drifted off to sleep on the couch, full of pizza and happiness, Liam turned on the small television, something he rarely did. He flipped through the channels, landing on a local news station broadcasting its evening report. And that's when his world tilted on its axis. The story was about a major downtown development project, a new skyscraper that was set to change the city's skyline. The lead developer, a notoriously reclusive and powerful figure named Marcus Kensington, had made a rare public statement. The camera panned across a group of executives standing beside him, and there, just behind her father's shoulder, was Clara. The reporter's voice faded into a dull roar in Liam's ears. "And his daughter, Clara Kensington, who has recently returned to the public eye after a prolonged absence, is expected to take a leading role in the project." She was wearing a tailored navy blue dress, her hair swept back in an elegant knot. She looked poised, powerful, and completely out of reach. She was the woman from the car, the woman who had listened to him talk about his son, the woman whose simple kindness he had superstitiously credited with his good fortune. Kensington. The name echoed in his mind. Kensington Global, one of the most powerful real estate firms in the country. They owned half of downtown. They were ruthless, known for buying out smaller firms and crushing competition. They were everything he wasn't. The pizza in his stomach turned to lead. The warmth of his small victory evaporated, replaced by a creeping, icy shame. He hadn't been a stranger she helped. He had been a project. A little blue-collar curiosity for a bored billionaire's daughter to observe. The kindness, the questions, the gentle smile, had it all been an act? A scene from a story she would tell her friends back in her world of penthouses and privilege? He looked at her face on the screen, so serene and controlled, and felt like a fool. He had let his guard down, had allowed himself a flicker of connection with someone who lived in a different universe. He looked around his small, cluttered apartment, at the worn couch and the second-hand television, and the gap between their worlds felt like a chasm. He had been so proud of his new job, his small step back toward stability. But what was his meager salary to a woman who probably spent more on a pair of shoes? The feeling of being seen, which had felt so good, now felt like being inspected under a microscope. He was an insect, a specimen of the working class she'd stumbled upon during her sabbatical. He clicked the television off, the screen going black, but her image remained, burned into his mind. The feeling of hope he'd cherished for 2 days curdled into a bitter, familiar resentment. The world wasn't fair, and he had been naive to think, even for a moment, that it could be. The next few days were a strange purgatory for Liam. He started his new job, immersing himself in blueprints and building codes, the familiar rhythm of the work a welcome anesthetic for the turmoil in his mind. He was good at his job, and the feeling of being useful again was a balm to his bruised ego. But every time he looked out the window of his new office, at the sprawling city below, he felt a fresh wave of humiliation. He saw Kensington Global logos on construction sites, on the sides of buildings, on the sleek black cars that ferried the city's elite. Her world was everywhere, a constant reminder of how small his was. He tried to convince himself it didn't matter. She was a brief, random encounter, a person he would never see again. But the memory of their conversation, of her genuine interest, of the way she'd looked at Leo, kept nagging at him. Had it all been a lie? Was it possible for someone with that much power to be that real? He was wrestling with these thoughts one afternoon when his new boss, a kind, middle-aged man named Frank, called him into his office. Frank was holding a tablet, a concerned look on his face. "Liam," he said, "I don't know how to ask this, but do you know Clara Kensington?" Liam's stomach dropped. We met once. Why?" Frank turned the tablet around. It was a tabloid website, the kind that trafficked in gossip and grainy paparazzi photos. The headline was splashy and speculative. "Billionaire heiress Clara Kensington's secret life. Is this her blue collar bow?" Below it was a photo, clearly taken with a long lens, of him and Clara standing on the sidewalk outside his apartment. He was holding Leo's drawing. She was smiling at him. It was the moment he had mistaken for a genuine connection, now twisted into a cheap public spectacle. "Someone must have been following her," Frank said, his voice gentle. "It's all over the place. They're painting this whole narrative. Runaway heiress finds love with a struggling single dad." Liam stared at the screen, his face hot with a mixture of anger and shame. He felt like he'd been stripped naked in the middle of a crowded street. Struggling single dad. They had made a caricature of his life, a role in her drama. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from an unknown number. He opened it. It was from her. "Liam, I am so sorry. I never wanted this. Can we please talk?" He didn't reply. What was there to say? He couldn't compete with this. He couldn't be a part of a world where his life, his son's life, was just fodder for headlines. His quiet, hard-won dignity was all he had left, and he wouldn't let it be compromised. He went back to his desk, the article burning a hole in his mind. He thought of Leo, of protecting him from this circus. He had to end this. He had to build a wall so high that her world could never touch theirs again. That evening, she came to his apartment. He saw her car pull up from his window, and his heart began to pound a frantic, angry rhythm. He didn't want to see her, didn't want to hear the excuses he was sure she had prepared. But then Leo, who had seen her too, ran to the door. "It's Clara!" Liam intercepted him, his hand firm on his son's shoulder. "Stay here, Leo." He opened the door, stepping out onto the landing and closing it firmly behind him, leaving his son on the other side. She stood there, looking smaller than she had on television, her face pale and her eyes wide with a desperate sincerity. "Liam, please," she began. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" Liam's voice was low, tight, and stripped of all the warmth she remembered. He stood with his arms crossed, a human barricade between her and the life he was so fiercely trying to protect. "Explain that this was all just some story for you? A little field trip to see how the other half lives?" "No, that's not what it was," she said, her voice pleading. She took a step forward, but he didn't move. "I didn't know anyone was taking pictures. I didn't know it would turn into this." This," he repeated, a bitter laugh escaping him. "This is your world, Clara, not mine. In my world we don't end up as headlines in gossip magazines. We just try to pay our rent and keep our kids safe." Her face crumpled slightly, the poise she usually wore like armor cracking under the force of his anger. "I was just trying to be myself for a while," she whispered. "Away from the Kensington name, away from the expectations. When I met you, you didn't see a headline. You just saw a person. And she trailed off, her throat tightening. "I just wanted to be that person a little longer." "And what about me?" he shot back, his voice rising despite his efforts to keep it steady. "Did you ever think about what happens when your two worlds collide? Did you think about my son? I don't want him growing up as the footnote in some billionaire's sob story." The words were harsher than he intended. But they were forged in the fire of his fear. Fear of being used, fear of being hurt, fear of letting someone into his life only to have them leave a trail of destruction. He had lived that before. He wouldn't do it again. "I would never hurt Leo," she said, her eyes welling with tears she refused to let fall. "I would never do anything to harm either of you." "You already have," he said, the words a final, decisive blow. He looked at her, at the genuine pain in her eyes, and for a fleeting moment he felt a pang of regret. But he quickly smothered it with the cold, hard logic of survival. They were from different universes, and he couldn't afford the price of admission into hers. "I think you should go," he said, his voice flat and final. He didn't wait for a reply. He turned, walked back into his apartment, and shut the door, the click of the lock echoing in the sudden, deafening silence. He leaned his forehead against the cool wood of the door, listening as her footsteps slowly retreated, followed by the soft sound of a car engine starting and then fading into the distance. Leo came and stood beside him, his small hand slipping into Liam's. "Is Clara gone?" he asked, his voice small. Liam nodded, unable to speak. "Is she coming back?" He closed his eyes, the wall he had just built around his heart feeling less like a fortress and more like a cage. "No, buddy," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I don't think she is." Clara drove with no destination in mind, the city lights blurring through the tears she could no longer hold back. Liam's words echoed in her head, each one a perfectly aimed stone hitting the fragile glass house of the life she'd tried to build. "This is your world, Clara, not mine." He was right. She had been naive, selfish even, to think she could simply step out of her life as if it were a coat she could hang in a closet. The Kensington name wasn't just a label, it was a gravitational force, pulling everything and everyone around her into its orbit. She had tried to escape it, but all she had done was drag an innocent man and his son into its chaotic, destructive path. She ended up at the one place she'd been avoiding, her father's penthouse. It was a sterile, sprawling space of marble floors, minimalist art, and panoramic views of the city she now saw as a cage. Her father was in his study, a glass of something dark in his hand, a tablet with the offending article displayed on its screen resting on the desk beside him. He didn't look up when she entered. "I trust you've handled this situation?" he asked, his voice as cold and polished as the granite desk. "There is no situation," she said, her voice trembling with a rage she rarely showed him. "There was just a man, a kind man, whose life I may have just ruined." Marcus Kensington finally looked at her, his eyes narrowed. "Kindness is a luxury, Clara. Dignity is an asset. You seem to have forgotten the difference. This man, this project of yours, it's a liability. The board is concerned. Our brand is built on strength and stability, not sentimental whims." "Our brand is built on a lie," she retorted, the words tumbling out. "We build luxury homes for families who are never there and talk about community while we tear down neighborhoods. We've built an empire of empty rooms, and I am sick of living in one of them." Her father stood, his presence filling the room. "You are a Kensington. You will act like one. You will issue a statement, distance yourself from this man, and you will put an end to this foolish rebellion. Or I will." Clara stared at him, at the man who had taught her everything about business and nothing about heart. And in that moment, something inside her broke, not in a way that shattered her, but in a way that finally set her free. "No," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "I won't." She turned and walked out of the study, out of the penthouse, leaving her father standing in the silent, opulent tomb he called a home. She didn't know where she was going, but for the first time, she wasn't running away from something. She was running toward it. She had made a mess, a colossal, heartbreaking mess. But as she drove back to her small, anonymous apartment, she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't fix the damage she'd caused from a distance. She had to show Liam, not tell him, that she wasn't the person her name suggested she was. She had to earn back the trust she had so carelessly broken, even if he never let her into his life again. The days that followed Liam's confrontation with Clara were heavy with a quiet, stubborn misery. He threw himself into his work, his focus on the clean, predictable lines of his blueprints, a welcome refuge from the messy, unpredictable tangle of his emotions. He was efficient, professional, and completely closed off. Frank, his boss, seemed to understand, giving him space and never mentioning the tabloid story again. At home, a new kind of silence had settled in. Leo was quieter, his usual vibrant chatter replaced with a more subdued watchfulness. He didn't ask about Clara again, but Liam would often find him staring at the crayon drawing of the two of them, his small finger tracing her stick figure outline. It was a silent accusation that cut Liam deeper than any angry words could. Liam told himself he had done the right thing. He had protected his son, he had preserved his dignity, but the victory felt hollow. The wall he had built to keep her out also served to lock him in, and the loneliness was a palpable, suffocating presence. He missed her. He missed the easy way she'd talked to him, the genuine warmth in her smile, the way she'd looked at him as if he were a man of value, not a man in need. One evening, about a week after he'd sent her away, Liam was working late, trying to solve a tricky design problem. He was staring at a blueprint, the lines blurring in front of his tired eyes, when he noticed an email in his inbox. The subject line was innocuous. Community outreach proposal. He almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but something made him open it. The email was from a small, local nonprofit called the Urban Garden Initiative. It detailed a proposal to turn a derelict, forgotten lot a few blocks from his apartment into a community garden and playground. It was a place he and Leo passed every day, a sad patch of cracked pavement and weeds. The proposal was ambitious, well-researched, and fully funded by a new, anonymous donor. They were looking for a pro bono architectural consultant to help with the design. Liam stared at the screen, a strange feeling creeping over him. The lot they were describing was right where he had imagined building a small park for Leo, a little green oasis in their concrete world. He had even sketched out a design for it in an old notebook, a whimsical plan with a spiral slide and a sandbox shaped like a ship. It felt too specific to be a coincidence. He scrolled to the bottom of the email, looking for the list of board members for the nonprofit. The names were unfamiliar, local community leaders and activists. But then he did a quick search for the Urban Garden Initiative itself. It was a new organization, founded only a month ago. Its primary funding came from a single source, the Nightingale Foundation. He'd never heard of it. He dug deeper, clicking through links, his heart beginning to pound a slow, steady rhythm. The Nightingale Foundation was a private charitable trust, its records sealed, its benefactor anonymous. But he found one small article on a philanthropic blog that mentioned its recent establishment. It had been founded by a young heiress who wished to remain out of the public eye. The article didn't name her, but it didn't have to. Liam knew. It was her. Clara hadn't just disappeared. She had seen a forgotten lot, a community in need, and she had quietly, efficiently, and anonymously moved to fix it. She hadn't called him, hadn't sent flowers, hadn't made a grand, public gesture. She had listened. She had remembered his passion for creating spaces that mattered, and she had created an opportunity for him to do just that, without any strings attached. She had given him a gift, not of money, but of purpose. Liam leaned back in his office chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating his face. The anger he had been nursing for a week began to dissolve, replaced by a complex, overwhelming wave of emotion he couldn't name. She hadn't used him as a story. She had seen him, truly seen him, and had respected him enough to offer him not a handout, but a hand up, and to do it in a way that preserved his dignity. The wall he had so proudly built around his heart suddenly felt less like a fortress and more like a prison. He had been so focused on protecting himself from her world that he had failed to see the quality of her character. He had judged her by her name, the very thing he had accused her of doing to him. He looked at the proposal again, at the chance to build something real, something that would bring joy to his son and his neighbors. It was everything he had ever wanted. But it was also a bridge back to her, and he wasn't sure if he was brave enough to cross it. He thought of Leo's sad, quiet eyes. He thought of his own suffocating loneliness. He had shut the door on the one person who had made him feel seen in years, all because of his own fear and pride. That night, he went home and found Leo sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the drawing of him and Clara. "Daddy," Leo said, his voice small, "do you think nice people can still make mistakes?" Liam sat down beside his son, his throat tight. "Yeah, buddy," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think they can. And I think maybe I made a big one." He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the number he had never deleted. He didn't know what he would say, but he knew he had to say something. He had to tear down the wall, brick by painful brick. He had to try. The phone rang 4 times, each ring a hammer blow against Liam's doubt. He almost hung up, his courage failing, when she finally answered. Her voice was quiet, hesitant, as if she were surprised to hear from him. "Liam?" "Clara," he said, his own voice unsteady. I got an email. About a garden." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." He could hear the lie, the careful construction of her anonymity. But this time, it didn't sound like a deception. It sounded like protection of his pride. "Clara," he said again, softer this time, "stop. I know it was you." The Nightingale Foundation. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with all the things they hadn't said. "I didn't want you to feel," she began. "Like a charity case?" He finished for her. "I know, but that's not what it felt like. It felt like you were listening." He could hear her exhale, a soft, shaky breath. "I was," she whispered. "I'm looking at the proposal right now," he said, his eyes scanning the document on his laptop screen. "It's a good plan, ambitious. It's going to need a lot of work." "I'm sure the right person can handle it," she replied, her voice still cautious. "Yeah," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "But I think the anonymous donor should probably be at the first design meeting. You know, to give her input." He heard a small, sharp intake of breath. "Liam, I don't know if that's a good idea." "The press." "I don't care about the press," he said, and he was surprised to find that it was true. "I care about building a playground for my son. And I care about talking to the person who made it possible. So, what do you say, Kensington? You in?" There was a long, silent moment, and then he heard Ida sound he had missed more than he'd realized. Her laugh, it was soft, a little watery, but it was real. "Okay, Miller," she said, her voice full of a warmth that traveled through the phone and settled right in his chest. "I'm in." The first design meeting wasn't in a boardroom. It was at a dusty picnic table in the middle of the derelict lot, a thermos of coffee and 2 mismatched mugs between them. The city hummed around them, but in their small circle, the world felt quiet, manageable. They talked for hours, not about their pasts, not about the headlines, but about the future. They talked about climbing structures and native plants, about sandbox drainage, and the perfect placement for a bench where a tired parent could watch their child play. He spread his old sketches on the table, and she looked at them not with the polite interest of a benefactor, but with the keen eye of a builder, a partner. She saw things he hadn't, suggested improvements, her mind sharp and insightful. They were from different worlds, yes, but in this space, on this project, they spoke the same language. The language of creating something good, something lasting, something real. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lot, Liam looked at her, at the way the golden light caught in her hair, at the smudge of dirt on her cheek, at the genuine, unforced smile on her face, and he knew the wall was gone. And in its place, they were starting to lay a new foundation. The project became their bridge. Over the next few weeks, Liam and Clara spent nearly every spare moment at the lot, which slowly began to transform under their combined efforts. He brought the architectural expertise, the practical knowledge of construction and materials. She brought a quiet, formidable efficiency, a skill for logistics and community organizing that he found both intimidating and deeply attractive. She was a natural leader, but she led with a gentle hand, listening more than she spoke, empowering the neighborhood volunteers who had started showing up, drawn by the contagious energy of the project. The press, for the most part, left them alone. The story of the blue-collar beau had faded, replaced by newer, shinier scandals. And Clara, through a series of shrewd, behind-the-scenes moves her father would have admired, had made it clear to the more persistent tabloids that the urban garden initiative was off-limits. She was protecting the project, but Liam knew she was also protecting him and the quiet space they were building between them. Leo was a constant, joyful presence at the site. He supervised the volunteers, handed out water bottles, and offered unsolicited but often surprisingly insightful design advice. He adored Clara, following her around like a small, devoted shadow. He would bring her handfuls of interesting rocks, show her his latest drawings, and explain the complex social dynamics of the playground. And Clara, in turn, treated him with a profound and patient affection. She would listen to his long, rambling stories with rapt attention, her head tilted, her smile genuine. She saw him not as an accessory to his father, but as a person in his own right. One sunny Saturday, as they were painting a mural on the back wall of a neighboring building, Liam stood back and watched her. She was laughing, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail, a streak of bright blue paint across her nose. Leo was beside her, carefully filling in a yellow sun. A group of neighborhood kids were arguing good-naturedly over who got to paint the dragon's tail. In that moment, the lines between their two worlds seemed to dissolve completely. She wasn't Clara Kensington, the billionaire heiress. And he wasn't Liam Miller, the struggling single dad. They were just two people, covered in paint, building something beautiful with their son. Later that afternoon, as they were cleaning brushes, she turned to him, her expression serious. "My father wants to meet you," she said. Liam's hand stilled. "Why?" "I think," she said, a small, wry smile on her face. "He wants to see who was brave enough, or stupid enough, to make his daughter defy him. And I think he's curious about the man who is making her happy." Liam looked at her, at the quiet confidence in her eyes, and knew he wasn't afraid. He could walk into any room, any lion's den, with her by his side. "Okay," he said. "When?" The meeting with Marcus Kensington was exactly as intimidating as Liam had imagined, and nothing like he expected. It took place not in a sterile boardroom, but in the quiet, wood-paneled library of the Kensington estate. Marcus was older than he appeared on television, his formidable presence softened by a visible frailty. He didn't offer a handshake, just a curt nod toward a leather armchair. Clara sat beside Liam, her hand resting lightly on his, a silent, steadying presence. The conversation was stilted at first. Marcus asked Liam about his background, his work, his plans for the future. His questions were sharp, analytical. The questions of a man who measured the world in assets and liabilities. Liam answered honestly, without apology or bravado. He spoke of his love for design, his commitment to the community garden project, and, most importantly, his devotion to his son. He didn't try to impress the old man, he just told him the truth. As he spoke, he saw something shift in Marcus's hard, assessing gaze. It was a flicker of something that looked almost like respect. "You're not what I expected," Marcus said finally, his voice a low grumble. "I expected a gold digger or a fool. You don't appear to be either." "I'm just a man who loves your daughter," Liam replied simply. Clara's hand squeezed his. Marcus was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the window. "She's different with you," he said, more to himself than to Liam. "She's lighter." "She hasn't been that way since her mother passed." He turned back to them, his expression unreadable. "I have spent my life building an empire to protect her, to give her everything. It seems the only thing she ever needed was something I couldn't buy." It wasn't an apology, not quite. But it was an admission, a crack in the old man's armor. As they left, Marcus stopped Liam at the door. "The garden?" he said. "It's a fine project. Let my foundation know if you require any further. resources. It was his version of a blessing. On the drive home, Clara was quiet, her head resting on Liam's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For not being afraid of him. And for seeing me, not my name." Liam smiled, turning onto their street, the familiar lights of their neighborhood welcoming them home. "I've been in love with just Clara, from the moment she offered a ride to a stranger in the rain," he said. The community garden opened on a bright, cloudless day in early fall. The lot that had once been a symbol of urban decay was now a vibrant explosion of color and life. Children's laughter echoed from the new playground, neighbors chatted over plots of late-season tomatoes, and the scent of grilled hot dogs filled the air. It was a celebration, a testament to what a community could build when given the chance. Liam stood near the newly installed water fountain, watching Leo chase a butterfly through a patch of marigolds. He felt a hand slip into his and turned to see Clara smiling at him, her eyes shining. "We did it," she said. "No," he corrected her gently. "You did it. You saw a need, and you met it." "I just opened a door," she replied. "You, and this whole neighborhood, are the ones who walked through it and built a home." A local news crew was there, but this time, they weren't interested in scandal. They were doing a story on urban renewal, on the power of community. They interviewed Liam about the design, and he spoke with a quiet, confident passion. They interviewed Clara about the Nightingale Foundation's role, and she gracefully deflected the credit, emphasizing the work of the volunteers. They were a team, seamless and strong. Later, as the party wound down, they sat on the bench Liam had designed, the one with a perfect view of the entire park. Leo ran up to them, his face smudged with chocolate, and handed them each a dandelion. "For you," he said, then ran off again. Clara looked at the small, willful flower in her hand. "You know," she said, "I used to think that love was about grand gestures, about big, dramatic moments." She looked at Liam, her love for him a tangible, glowing thing in her eyes. "But it's not. It's about this. It's about building a garden. It's about showing up. It's about finding a home in the most unexpected of places." Liam leaned in and kissed her, a slow, gentle kiss that tasted of sunshine and second chances. He had once been a man walking alone in the rain, and now he was here, in a garden of his own design, with the woman he loved and the son who was his world. He hadn't just fixed his life. He had built a new one, stronger and more beautiful than he ever could have imagined.